Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders podcast, a show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today we have a special guest. We're joined by Dan Mitchell, who's a Senior Vice President and Global Learning Leader at Marsh. Welcome to the show, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Where are you joining us from?
Right.
Let's start there.
I am in Brooklyn, New York.
Nice. How was it in New York? Because all I remember is sort of the pictures and images of the news of just the streets empty, no one walking around. That was the last time I saw pictures.
Yeah.
Is it back to bustling and energy and what we know it for?
It's definitely picking up. I think that, there's so much pent up energy here just coming out of the pandemic. So many people for so long have wanted to just get out and move around and move about freely, go back to restaurants, their old haunts that they were going to, prior to the pandemic. So I'm seeing, like in my neighborhood where I live in a part of Brooklyn called Park Slope. There's, a lot more people coming out now that restaurants have opened up and there's some semblance of indoor dining, at least in a lot of restaurants. Mm-hmm. And so, with that's been a signal to people that, hey, now is the time to just kind of get out and move about, reconnect with friends. There's, like in my neighborhood, a couple of streets that on the weekends get blocked off from, car traffic. And then, the people who go to visit different restaurants and bars, it kind of just all flows out into the street, which is very cool to see because, during the pandemic, I like to go out for walks like in the evening and stuff after I'm done working. And, during the height of the pandemic, it was just like, you go walking around, everyone's wearing their mask. There's hardly anyone on the street. If they are on the street, it's because they're either walking their dog or picking up food for, lunch or dinner or whatever. And, but now you're seeing this opening up, right? That energy is really coming back, and that's great to see.
Amazing, good to hear. We're kind of experiencing something similar. It was only a week ago that we were allowed to eat indoors, and it was quite surreal going for a meal with my family and friends, just sitting inside. And just felt, oh my god, we're sitting inside having a meal. How's that? The fact that that's novel and strange as well.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy what has given this whole experience that we've all, or that most of us have gone through in some way, shape, or form. It's like these things that we took for granted, before the pandemic, when you don't get a chance to actually do just basic things that you're used to, when those start to come back, it's all of a sudden, one of the things that I felt is just a real appreciation, again, just for the opportunity to like sit in a restaurant, and just like order food and just live like a normal, unimpeded life, I guess you could say. So, we're not there yet, and there's different parts of the world that are still really under the thumb of the pandemic in a big way. Latin America, India. There are places that are still suffering quite a bit. So, but we'll get there.
100%. But you are right. It's a new attitude of gratitude, more of an appreciate for those things that we never really thought about and we took for granted, as well.
Yeah, that's right.
But before we go any further, tell everyone, a little bit more about yourself personally and your background and journey to where we are now at Marsh.
Yeah. So as you said before, I'm Global Learning Leader at Marsh. I've been in the Global Learning Leader role since about mid-2018. That's when I moved back to the United States, actually, to take on this global role with Marsh. Prior to that, I lived overseas for about between 23, 24 years. Most of that was in Asia, but a little bit of time in the Middle East and in Europe as well. And the last role that I had actually was with Marsh. Prior to the Global Learning Leader role, I was with Marsh as the head of talent learning and well, at the time we called it talent learning and diversity. We now call it talent learning and inclusion, but I was head of talent learning and diversity for Asia and Pacific. So based in Taiwan for a while, based in Singapore prior to that. And then, before that, going back years and years, a variety of different roles that I had in different countries around the world, and going way, way back in history, back before I left the United States in what was it, 1995, I think, I worked for Kaplan, a company that a lot of people might be familiar with, the test prep company. So I was, that was while I was in graduate school, and after I graduated from university. So I was working for Kaplan, running one of their centers in Northern California and doing a lot of teaching, GRE, GMAT, all the tests that you have to take for graduate school and all that kind of stuff. yeah. And then well before that, I was in the military. I had some experience in the United States Marine Corps. So yeah, there, I guess in a nutshell is my, my story.
Amazing. Amazing. There's so much to unpack there as well. Because that was something that really stood out to me when I was stalking you on LinkedIn. I hope you don't mind, is your background and experience across these different countries and regions of the world. Was that a conscious decision? Was that planned, or was it really just where your career took you and the opportunities opened up?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say it was part of some grand plan, but really it wasn't. I mean, I was very interested when I was working for Kaplan and going to school at the same time. I mean, I was very interested in working overseas. I had this dream that I'd been kind of developing for quite a while earlier in my life about having the opportunity, in particular, to go to Asia. And at the time, I was really fascinated with Japan. I studied Japanese for a while in university, and I was really interested in going over to Japan. And then while I was working for Kaplan, I thought, okay, well, let me just contact Kaplan businesses in that part of the world, in Taiwan and Japan and China and Hong Kong and various places, and just say, hey, I've got experience working in Kaplan. I've trained teachers before. I've run classes before. I've managed a center before. If you're looking for anyone with my kind of experience, hey, let me know, and I'd be happy to fly over and work for you on the cheap. You know, it was that approach that, you know, of course, you know, probably nowadays we would tell people, you know, be careful how you do that. You don't want to send the wrong message.
I think we need more of that in this day and age.
Yeah,
I think so.
It's funny you bring that up. I actually ran with our colleagues in Latin America, our early career colleagues in Latin America, a couple of weeks ago. The talent learning and inclusion leader there invited me to a call where she got all the graduate program participants in that region to join this call. And it's just basically these calls that she has where she invites a leader to the call, and it's, you know, very free flowing. There's no PowerPoint decks or prefabricated questions. It's just like, hey, you have a question, ask away. And that's one of the things that came up is someone asked, you know, you've had a lot of years of experience working overseas. Like, how did you do that? It was a very similar to the question you asked. And I kind of answered it in a similar way. I said, you know, what I took away from that experience is, before you know, opportunities are opened up to you, I just said you're gonna end up burning through a lot of time and energy waiting for something like that to happen. I was just like, well, what's the worst that can happen?
The worst that can happen is
someone will say no. I mean, okay, now you know. Now you tick that box and move on to the next one, right? It's just so that's kind of what I did. And luckily, you know, when I did reach out, I actually had there were a lot of people who were interested because, you know, one of the things, of course, that businesses generally struggle with is I didn't really have the language skills at the time, a little bit of Japanese, but beyond that, I was, you know, hopeless. So, you know, people were like, well, you know, he hasn't got the language skills, but he's got all this other stuff. So yeah, let's bring him over. And so that's how I ended up actually moving overseas. And then from there, it was just like, same thing. I mean, I would love to say I had a plan. I didn't really. It was just basically keeping my eyes open and my ears open for opportunities. And if something seemed interesting and seemed fun and seemed like an opportunity to learn a lot, then I would jump on it. That was my, you know, it goes back to, at least the way I think about it, it goes back to values. What do you value as important? Now, if you value money and quick promotions and, you know, basically moving up the ladder, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to ascribe a particular, like, you know, value judgment to that focus. But you have to remember, if that's your focus, that's going to basically it's going to frame decisions that you make, because you're going to make decisions oftentimes that are driven by that set of particular values. Those weren't my values at the time. My values were more about learning, opportunity to have fun, to see the world, for personal growth, to take a risk. That's all the stuff that I really valued. And that's where my attention was. And if your attention goes a particular direction, it's going to be much easier for you to spot opportunities with that frame of reference. It's kind of like that old game of like, you know, if you're on a road trip and it's just like, you know, spot the red cars or whatever, you know, and every time you spot a red car, you know, I don't know, something happens. Well, if you're attuned to that particular stimulus, you're going to notice it much more frequently than you otherwise would. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what ultimately led me in the direction that I went in, is just basically making a concrete decision on, this is what I want. These are the kind of experiences I want to have. And that's what tended to surface for me. And, you know, there you go.
There you go. I think it's no coincidence. You said it's not much of a plan, but I think you're underestimating yourself a little bit on that, because that's the thing. Once you have an attitude where you're willing to go for things and whether you get it or not, that kind of stimulates how you think and act on a daily basis. I'm quite similar where, like, I'll give you an example, not so much kind of related, but I got contacted by the global vice president of HR from Apple. And they said, Chris, this is years ago, I'm trying to apply for this role at Amazon. I sent my CV, but no one's come back to me. And it was the exact same role, and they was getting rid of that role at Apple. And so I was like, have you contacted them directly and picked up the phone and tried to speak to anyone? Oh no, I just applied on LinkedIn. I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
And I was like,
along with 4,728 other people.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. So I called up Amazon, like a friend of mine. I was like, can you connect me with this person? Because you can see on LinkedIn the hiring manager. I was like, you can see the hiring manager for this exact role on LinkedIn, and called the hiring manager. I was like, look, I've got the exact person at Apple that does literally the exact role that you're hiring for, and within a week they had that job, and they called me and was like, thank you so much. But sometimes I'm like, people just have these, like, I don't know, it's like tunnel vision where they can't see anything outside of, and I've done it. I've said it so many times for friends.
That's right. And I think that for a lot of people, I mean, it's why does that happen, right? I mean, there's a number of reasons why things like that happen. Basically the very traditional permission-based approach to education that we have. There are certain ways that people get socialized to behaving and acting and planning a certain way. But then what I find is most people, especially like early career colleagues, I mean, I'm thinking about like early career and graduate colleagues, for example, that work in our organization. Once you share with them an idea that kind of busts that shell a little bit, that kind of challenges their preconceived notion about what the right way is to do things, most of the time people are just like, whoa, they open up really quickly. Right? Because it's all of a sudden, like, for example, I mean, one of the things that I mentioned on this call, and I've included this information, like we recently developed a program for early career and graduate colleagues, and pretty much anyone can take it. It's a blended program on learning agility. And it's learning agility conceptually, but it's also learning agility in terms of thinking about, what is learning, redefining learning for people. Because a lot of times, as many people do, they tend to think pretty traditionally about what learning is, and they haven't necessarily expanded their mind to think about what learning is. And one of the things I mentioned in that particular program, and then I also mentioned on the call that I had with all these early career and graduate colleagues in Latin America, was I said, a lot of times the difference between people who are, as successful as they want to be versus those people who feel like either they've been left behind or they're just not where they want to be or whatever. I said, there's a lot of things that drive that. It's a multivariate problem. There's a lot of variables that go into that. Some of it is, based on intelligence. Some of it is based on kind of where you are. There's all sorts of things that are kind of outside your control, but there's a lot that's within your control. And one of the things that's within your control, and I said, one of the things I said to people is along the lines of what's in your control is, a lot of times the people who are successful getting what they want are the people who are prepared to do the things that other people are not prepared to do.
Yes, and be rejected.
Right? It's just like, are you prepared to take those steps? Are you prepared to keep going when you get rejected? Are you prepared to make the call or ask for the thing that you want as opposed to sitting back and waiting for someone to give it to you? Are you prepared to put in the extra work, 10%, 20%, 30% the day before a meeting with a client or for an interview or whatever, where other people are just like, yeah, I think I'm good to go. I'm going to rely on my past success and my intelligence to carry me all the way. It's just like that. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It's not like a massive investment above and beyond what everyone else is doing. It's just sometimes, it kind of goes back to that it's somewhat crude, but I think a reliable adage of, you don't have to be, oh shoot, what is it? You're being chased, a group of people being chased by a lion. I don't have to be the fastest. I just have to be faster than you. I mean, the idea is, I mean, it's a crude metaphor for what I'm talking about, but the idea is just, you don't have to be the best in the world. You just have to continuously be making an investment yourself. And like I said, just doing the things that other people aren't prepared to do. And I remember after I mentioned that on this call, I got one of the early career, the graduate colleagues in Latin America. She emailed me and she said, and I don't know how it landed for other people, but for her in particular, she said that one statement just cracked. And I remember the way she put it. She said, it cracked my universe wide open. And I was like, at first I was kind of like, really? But then I thought, well, okay, cool. You know, because it was just maybe a message that she hadn't.
100%.
You know, it's just like, yeah.
I love this topic, by the way. This topic is amazing because, you know, 4 years ago, I was a sales director in a company, no personal brand, that certainly didn't have thousands of followers online, and you know, close to 500,000 people listen to the show every month. And I'm like, I'm the least qualified person probably to host a HR show. There's so many people out there that know more about this subject than I do. But the difference is, are they willing to kind of go through the thousands of no's and rejections when I reach out to guests to come on the show? So I always get people go, Chris, how do you have all these LinkedIn influencers and these, you know, billionaires and people that they see as celebrities on the show? I'm like, all you see is that. What you don't see is the 1,000 no's that I got before that. Before that one yes. You're just looking at the surface level of what's taking place as well.
Absolutely. It's the proverbial 15 years to become an overnight success story, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's totally right. I mean, you know, like I mentioned before, it's a multivariate problem. I'm not a big fan, and you know, you hear this a lot of times in business, and definitely from consulting companies. I hate to say it. I was a consultant before, so I'm guilty of this. But a lot of times what people try to do, I think, for good reason, I think, whether it's because they have an agenda, they're trying to sell a service, or it's just basically how they say the world and it's a way to attract attention, or, you know, it just as a very strongly held belief. But it's this idea that, you know, if you look at a particular problem that we have in the world, there's one explanation for that problem, right? Yeah. It's basically, this problem exists because of X, whatever X is, and X is the one perfect explanation for why that problem exists. That's almost never true.
No.
It's a multivariate problem. And there's a lot of variables that go into determining, I mean, any equation, right? Basically, it balances out when you actually understand what all the variables actually mean and the relative balance or leverage that they have on, you know, the ultimate solution to that problem. So, you know, persistence is one of the variables. Now, how important a variable is it? In my opinion, it's a massively important variable.
100%.
But massive. How important it is, where it actually stacks up in the overall relative importance of an individual success depends on a lot of other things. And for you, basically what I'm hearing, and this is true for me as well, you know, you could be the smartest person in the world, but if you're smart and lazy, you're not going to get very far. If you're smart and persistent, man, you're going to be way ahead of the pack. And most of the people in our world, most of the people in business have I think they have enough intelligence to take them a long way. The question is, are they going to go as far as they want to in the direction that they want to based on the habits that they've got? Because that's where you get your leverage, I think. You know, you've got your intelligence, you've got your upbringing, you've got your basically, you know, nature, nurture, you know, all the things that have made you who you are up until now. But then there are the habits that you have, that you've built over a lifetime that you've got today. And do they work for you or do they work against you?
Yeah.
And, you know, you talked about sales. I mean, yeah, when I was in Southeast Asia working for Mercer before, one of the jobs that I had was, you know, leading a sales function, a market development function. And that was one of the things I focused on a lot. So your daily habits. What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
You took the words out of my mouth.
What's the first thing you do when you get to the office?
Yep.
Yeah.
I actually say that if I would not be where I am right now without those habits I built over the last 15 years in sales. So, you always hear, you're one step closer to every no is a one step closer to a yes, right? Like, and that's literally how I approached building this show and the podcast and the business. There was nothing that could deter myself and Shane, who's my business partner, because that's just built in what we do. We've been doing this since we were 17 is when I first started in sales. And that's normal. To be rejected daily is just, it's just a normal, like, I remember we found this Excel spreadsheet online and it was a list of the top LinkedIn influencers. And I was like, Shane, I'm going to have every single one of those people on our podcast. And I remember him laughing at me saying, who's going to want to speak to you, Chris? Right. And I remember I spent the evening DMing people on LinkedIn. And I got a message back from Michael Dell the same day. And I was like, Michael Dell just replied to me on LinkedIn. You know, at the time he was worth like 40 billion. I remember Googling it. And he said it was a no, by the way. But for me, it didn't matter. Yeah. It was the fact that I got it right. Yeah, that's right. The fact that I got it right.
He responded.
Yeah, but he responded. I was so excited by the no. I've never been so excited. I went home and was like to my wife, Michael Dell replied to me on LinkedIn. And there was a lot of no's.
The lesson there is huge. And I mean, it applies, definitely applies to sales. It goes without saying. Anyone who's listening to the podcast or watching the podcast who's been in sales knows this to be true. But I think it applies to everything. I mean, if ambition, I think a lot of times, it was funny, I was talking with one of the senior leaders in our company just earlier this week. And we were talking about a leadership development program that we're running right now and enhancements that we want to make to it, conversations we want to have with the participants. And one of the things he said that really stuck with me, and I really believe, is I want to make sure that participants in this program know that ambition and having ambition is not a bad word. It's not a dirty word, because, it's, one of the things we worked really hard to do in this program was to identify leaders who aren't necessarily the best people at, waving the flag and blowing the whistle and tooting the horn and saying, look at me, look at me. Some leaders I think are very good at executive presence and showing up and especially good leaders, I think, who are outgoing, have that ability to attract attention themselves in a positive way. But there are a lot of people out there who have great leadership potential, but who either because they think a certain way about ambition or combined with certain personality traits tend to kind of fall a little bit under the radar of attention and notice of senior executives. I said one of the things behind that sometimes, and it comes down to an individual conversation with participants, is that they believe that ambition or having ambition, being ambitious, is somehow, there's something dirty about that.
Yeah.
There's something inauthentic about that. And so there's nothing wrong with that. We need people to know that having ambition is a healthy thing, especially if the ambition is linked to other positive traits and the impact that you want to have in the world and everything else. I mean, my God, how many people didn't go as far in whatever direction they want to go in life, simply because they felt like the desire to go far was something to be avoided, that there was a value judgment against that desire to go far because they believed like, well, I don't know. It's just it's a notion or a picture that they have in their mind, a bias that they have where they link ambition to a certain, I don't know. When they think about ambition, they think about Gordon Gekko, it's just like,
that's a good example,
yeah. It's just like, I don't want to, I don't want anyone to see me that way. Yeah. And it's just like, I'm pretty sure, Mother Teresa is a bad example, but I'm sure Mother Teresa didn't necessarily you could think about her ambition linked so, linked so directly and strongly to the desire to help other people, right? Was that ambition, in terms of how that ambition manifested, was it ugly? Was it Gordon Gekko-ish? No, of course not. Of course not. It showed up in a different way for her based on the other values that she had. It's all part of the mix. It's just basically, have you thought about that particular aspect of yourself in a way that's really honest and accurate rather than clouded by some preconceived notion that is getting in your way, basically. It's become a derailer to an extent.
I think that was something which was something that we focus on so much in that company I mentioned, where to the point where we had we had about 25 people on the sales team. We had this huge wall. It's like our vision board, like a giant vision board. And we had different sections for different members of the team. And some of the things that were on the board, you'd think, that's crazy that this person's going for something so audacious and so big. And the amount of times we made those things happen, even me personally, when I was 18, I put a picture of a penthouse apartment on there. And literally 15 years later, my wife and I bought our apartment, and it looked exactly like the photo on the wall. I had no idea. I found it in a box. I found it in a box, and I was like, oh my God, look at the layout of our kitchen and living room. This is literally, and I'm convinced subconsciously that's why, because it was only the third property we viewed, and I was like, this is it. And she was like, wow. I was like, I don't know. This is the one. And I've been staring at that for over 10 years on that board. Yeah,
I'm gonna tip my hand here a little bit, because I was having again, this is another conversation I had with one of our early career graduate colleagues, And on this call, he started talking to me. He asked me, have you read the book, The Secret? And I was just like, hold on. I'm sure you're asking me that question because you read The Secret and you really loved it. He's like, oh, yeah, it was great. I said, okay. Yes, I'm familiar with The Secret. Yes, I've read The Secret. And I'll tell you on the honest truth, it's garbage. And I said, here's why. And I told him, I said, this is my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. You think I'm totally wrong, but here's why. I said, the problem with basically books like that is what they tend to show you, or they show you the examples where the person did all the visualization, had the visualization board, they had the picture up on the wall, the thing that they really wanted, and they got it. What they don't show you is all the hundreds of thousands
Yes.
of people who did that who never got anything.
Yes,
so there's a survivorship bias built into that book and the stories in that book. I said, listen, there's nothing wrong. And I've done the same thing. You have the thing that you want up on the wall, whether it's a picture, it's a statement. I've got Post-it notes on my screen right now that I'm looking at. I've got Post-it notes on my screen. Some of them are, I've got a reminder here about, emotional intelligence and, being more mindful about how I show up. That's a problem that I've got. But I've also got stuff here that's related to goals that I have. And I said, the missing ingredient a lot of times is not having the clear picture in your mind of what you want. It's basically having the willingness to get up earlier in the morning, go to bed later at night, and do the hard work to get there. I said, you can dream all you want until you're blue in the face, but if you don't do the work necessary to make it a reality, it's nonsense. What you said reminded me of that. And I'm sure that's probably true for you. I don't imagine you to be the kind of person who sits down and basically puts that picture up on your vision board, and then you sit back with a tub of ice cream and go, okay, I'm just
directly linked to the sales
star and make that happen.
Yeah, those boards were directly linked to our sales targets, and we worked backwards from there. So we literally had a board where you could see how far away someone was from achieving. So we had some short term, medium term, and long term. So short term, it could be literally, I remember, I'm just thinking of it actually, it could be an example of one of the team members wanted a custom made suit. This is a real story. And that was like a short term goal that I've never had a made to measure suit. And that was a big deal for them. They'd always had hand me down suits and just cheap suits. So that's a short, and we could see like, AJ actually, if you ever listened to AJ, it was AJ at the time. He was like, I'm 3 deals away. Right, so we could see that and we can measure, and that's where it got exciting. So like you're saying, you can't just dream about it and think about it and it's going to appear. We could measure it day by day, deal by deal, how far we got, and we celebrated that together as well. Yeah. So yeah, you definitely got to have a plan.
That's right. Again, it's one of these things where I'm sure a lot of listeners are hearing what we're saying right now and just going, yeah, listen, you're trotting well, you're covering well-trodden ground here. It's easy to forget, especially for whether you're an early career colleague, you're in a graduate program, or maybe you've just forgotten it. You've just forgotten that, again, it goes back to habits. What are the habits that you've built up, and have you gone back and really analyzed whether or not the habits that you've got, the routines that you've actually built for yourself every day are getting you closer to where you want to get to, whatever that is, whether it's a custom made 3-piece suit or a nice new flat somewhere, or even something more modest than that. Doesn't really matter. Different goals, different people. I mean, everyone's got the thing that they want. But the thing is are you actually taking the steps necessary to get you closer to that? Because it's just a matter of just looking at the results you're getting and asking yourself, is this really working or not? And just being really honest with yourself. That's one of the things that when I have conversations, I mean, going back to my role a little bit, when I have a conversation with a business that wants to develop a new program, I mean, first there's a whole conversation about whether training in whatever form it takes, let's say learning, formal, informal, 70, 20, 10, whatever it is, whether that is the solution to the problem, because sometimes it's not, especially training, because a lot of times in companies, right, basically people see a problem, they say, let's take the training hammer and beat that problem over the head, and then it'll eventually solve the problem. So getting past that, of course, there's the question of, is this even the right approach to solve this particular problem, or this, take advantage of this opportunity? But then once you've answered that question, generally what I try to do with people is, okay, before we talk about anything else, before we talk about, the design approach, or, they have only got a limited amount of time, or people really love, kind of meeting face to face in short bursts, or what those design approaches that we often talk about, I always take the question first to starting the design with the evaluation objectives. How do you know this will have been successful? And that's oftentimes a much harder conversation to have than people realize, because they don't really know. You know, they haven't given it a whole lot of thought. Sometimes they have. Sometimes they know exactly what they want to see. Other times it's just like a long bullet pointed list of, you know, kind of fuzzy, poorly defined indications that things might be going in the right direction. And that, in my experience, taking the time to dig down into those and clarify those things and get them to the point where, as much as possible, they're really observable. They're, you know, measurable in whatever way you define that. It just makes everything easier, because then you can back your way into, Tim Ferriss talks about, you know, the minimum effective dosage. Mm-hmm. What is the minimum effective dosage necessary to get the behavior change that you want to see that leads to the results that you want to see? And that also just helps you remove a lot of fat, because that's another problem that we've got in the world of learning and development and training specifically, is we tend to throw the kitchen sink at people. You know, it's just like basically throw a lot of stuff at people, something's bound to stick. And I know most people who are in learning and development will tell you that's a bad idea. And yet at the same time, that's oftentimes what ends up happening. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, ingrained habits, fear of getting something wrong. A lot of times people feel like, you know, I call it like grading by weight. So it's almost like, you know, it's not really training, it's not really learning unless you're spending a certain X number of hours in a seat somewhere, right? And it's just like, come on, you know, let's step back and reevaluate those beliefs and determine to what extent they actually hold any water at all. Mm-hmm.
I know something you're focusing on, and it's been a big challenge for our audience as well, is how we can support our leaders to deliver during these disrupted times that we operate in. And I'd love to know more about how you're supporting your leaders at Marsh during this, you know, the last 15 months and beyond.
I think one of the really important things in a role like this, and you can apply this to a lot of different roles, a lot of different people in work and life. The first thing you have to do is you really have to kind of come face to face and deal with your own lack of knowledge in an area like this. What I mean by that is, you know, early on the pandemic, this goes back to last year, there was a group of people in the business that came to me and said, okay, we need to design a program to address well-being and resilience and mindset, because people are really struggling. There, you know, there's depression, there's, you know, everything that I think everyone is familiar with, you know, all the kind of symptoms that were emerging in people. And the first thing I said was, I have two questions. I said, one question is, why do we think that training of some kind is the way to solve this problem? And then the second question I asked was, why on earth would you think that I would know anything about what to do in this situation to help people address their mental health? I said, I'm not saying no. And there is a way we can actually work through this, but we need to be really careful about our own assumptions about how much positive impact we can have here. And I said, is the creation of a program the answer? When you've got a lot of hardworking, smart, ambitious people in organizations, they're nothing if not always looking out for the next problem to solve, the next opportunity to take advantage of. I mean, that's just natural. That it comes with the territory, right? The downside of that is, one downside, of course, which we always struggle with, is initiative fatigue. It's just like, if you're not starting something new, you're doing something wrong, which I'm not sure how true that is. True in some instances, but I think there's a little bit more selectivity that needs to be applied. But the other thing too, and this applied last year when we were dealing with this challenge, and also earlier this year, we had the same conversation. And one of the things that I mentioned was, maybe less is what's needed. I'm not saying let's not do anything, but I'm saying let's be very, very selective at looking at the Venn diagram overlap between the challenges that people have and what benefit can be derived from the normal solutions or the solution set that we could possibly bring to bear here. And then with everything that falls outside of that overlap in the Venn diagram, give people time away to deal with things in the way that they need to deal with them. People are always struggling to discriminate between the signal and the noise. How on earth do we think that adding more programs to the mix, doing more things, more sessions, more webinars, sharing more articles, sending out more emails, why do we think that adding more noise is somehow going to make it easier for them to find the signal, because that's ultimately what's coming down to. So basically what I'm saying is that, yeah, we did do a number of things, but I think we made a lot of mistakes earlier on, assuming that by just doing a lot of stuff, we were being way more helpful than we really were. And what we found out is that it wasn't helping, because all of our leaders were dealing with so many other things at the same time. Their home life, taking care of clients, meeting objectives, doing all the stuff that they normally had to do on top of dealing with, all the challenges associated with the pandemic and the full spectrum of challenges. It's a massive amount of noise coming at people. So it just comes back to learn from your mistakes, be humble, don't assume that you have all the answers, and don't assume that necessarily just because there's a problem out there that's in need of a solution, that you're the right person or the right team to provide the solution. Sometimes, the best solution for the issues around resilience and well-being and helping people deal with the challenges that they've had is just give them more space to spend time with themselves, spend time with their family, get out of the office or away from their home office, get out in nature, whatever. Give them the freedom and the space to kind of deal with these challenges in a way that is going to be right for them, and stop assuming that the creation of more programs is ultimately the answer.
Yeah, I love that, because our first instinct, isn't it, is to give more. Whereas actually, if we just take away, let's give people more time off, take away tasks, just make things a bit easier rather than adding more noise. So I think the way you put it was perfect.
There's a real challenge there, right? Because, if my boss comes to me and says, okay, Dan, here we have these problems, I need solutions from you, X, Y, and Z. How easy it is going to be for me to go back to my boss and say, you know what? Maybe
I get it, yeah.
The solution to this problem,
but that's not what you're saying, though.
Me to do anything.
Yeah, but that's not what you. And the way you explained it is not what you're saying. And so, what did you end up doing after having that conversation? And what were the steps that you end up taking in terms of providing support to those line managers? I feel like those are probably part of the population of employees which were really affected. They, not only having to take care of their own mental health and well-being, but now their teams. And many people, including myself, were not prepared for that. That was, Yeah,
that's right. That I think is that was the big challenge for a lot of people. I mean, some people just, I think, intuitively, it's the whole idea of like, put on your oxygen mask first before you help the people around you. I think a lot of people intuitively had a pretty good grasp of how to go about. A lot of people didn't. People struggled. I mean, definitely. But then on top of that, you layer on top, just as you said, the struggles of the people around you. And as a leader, one of the main things you want to do as a leader is you want to be there for your people, right? That's job one of a leader, one could argue, apart from just delivering objectives, is really being there for your people and being on point to know what your people's challenges are and just be available for them to help out where it makes sense to do so. And so it was really about what we tried to think about is, what are the resources and tools that we can give to our leaders to help them do those two things? But then ultimately, it's got to be up to them. They've got to make the choice. We can't force them to make a choice a particular way or another. We've just got to make it as easy as possible for them to find the information that they need in order to be able to make the right choices. So that is where it gets interesting, because it's like, how do you do that in as frictionless a way as possible? So it's almost like, it gets back to doing less in order to do more. Let's do fewer emails, less communication overall, but make sure the communication is very targeted in a way that we haven't done in the past.
Yeah, tailored.
A lot of times, the solution a lot of times is just blast a whole bunch of communication out into the world, and it's kind of like throwing the kitchen sink, right?
That was a big issue. That was a big issue, because that means no one reads it.
That's a mistake that we made. Yeah, no one reads it because it just becomes part of the noise, and that's a mistake that we made earlier on. But then we just started to fine tune. We started to kind of get much more targeted in our communication, and also get a little bit more personalized, get away from the corporate communication constraints that we put on ourselves and over formalize communication. A lot of times it was just like, remove the banners, remove the
human
corporate speak, make it human, get rid of the BS, and just kind of focus on and say, hey, we're all dealing with these challenges. We're here for you. We've got some resources to use. If you've got a question, contact this specific person rather than some nondescript talent at marsh.com, whatever, something like that. It's just really trying to think differently about how we go about communicating these resources to people, making them available, and just trying to make those personal connections to be available to help out. HR leaders, talent leaders had to step up and be more, be coaches more than possibly they ever had in the past. We did some things right and we screwed some things up, like everyone. We made some mistakes. We learned, we made some mistakes. We were successful in some areas. I think ultimately, and one of the things I'll leave you with and this is, powerful learning that I got from back in my days earlier in my life and when I was in the military, in the Marine Corps, and I served in the infantry in the Marines. And one of the things that we did, and some people may be familiar with this concept, is the concept of an after action review. Is after you take some particular action, whether it's a, kind of like a company level exercise or, basically a platoon level exercise or a squad level exercise, and it's in training and also in combat, you bring everyone together and talk about, what did we do? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? What lessons do we learn? And what are we going to do differently next time? And that, I think, hopefully, is what a lot of companies are going to elect to do. When all the dust is settled and all this stuff, get back together and say, hey, what can we learn from this experience about what we did well and what we did not so well? Let's forgive ourselves for our mistakes, but learn the right lessons, because this is not going to be the last time this happens.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We need part 2, Dan. I feel like we need part 2 of the podcast. I've really enjoyed this as well. I'm sure everyone listening
is fun. This is fun. It's great. It's great. Yeah. Anytime if you want to, I'll do the best I can to
no worries.
Be on point with the good stuff.
I know you got to run now, but if there's kind of one, we've covered so much. We didn't even get into half the topics we wanted to talk about. But if there's if there's one parting piece of advice, what would that be? And also, where can people connect with you if they want to reach out and say hello?
Yeah, I'm not really on social media apart from LinkedIn. So if you search for me on LinkedIn, Dan Mitchell, you'll find me. Parting advice. Wow. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, just really take a hard look in the mirror and just basically, ask yourself the tough questions about where am I under investing time and energy and just taking care of myself and the people closest to me. My physical health, my mental health. I mean, these are all things you hear about a lot, but I think especially in HR, people in learning, people in talent, people in inclusion, diversity roles, whatever it is, we spend so much time thinking about the welfare of the people around us that we often ignore our own. And man, you got to stop. You got to stop and take a breath. Stop, take a breath, look around at your particular situation with yourself, with your family, with your team, and just go, hey, maybe we need to actually invest a little bit of time and energy in taking care of ourselves, because I can tell you right now, and this is happening in our organization and a lot of organizations right now, people are, if they're not burnout already, they've been experiencing kind of long-term low-grade burnout symptoms for a while. Yeah. And it's just like, man, you just really need, you only live once and life is too short. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm seeing this. I'm seeing this as well from speaking to HR leaders and all of the area leaders that you mentioned as well. And personally, I made that mistake early on, and I suffered the consequences through panic attacks and anxiety and everything else that came along with it. And I realized unless I take care of Chris, I can't be of service to anyone else. So
that's true. I mean, I've got my my issues as well. I mean, I have a condition called alexithymia, and it's basically, long story short, is I don't deal effectively with emotions. The way I explain it to people is that when I experience emotions, it's kind of like eating spicy food. I only taste the heat. I don't taste the flavor. And that's how I explain how I experience emotions. And that's one of the things I've had to really get in touch with myself, connecting with family, seeing a therapist, just really taking the steps necessary to realize that, I'm one of these tough guys. I'm just like you fall down and you break your leg, put some cocoa butter on it. You'll be fine. Not a good move. You got to recognize when you're struggling. And that's been difficult for me because I generally don't know how to pay attention to those signals myself. And I've had to really, really zero in on that for myself, just to make sure that I'm managing my own mental health better than I normally do. And there's a lot of people out there like that. A lot of people that we work with that have got their own normal, life problems, but also people who've got mental health issues that probably to a large extent have gone ignored way more than they should during this pandemic. And that is something that we all have to be mindful of.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Dan. I know you have to run now, and so I really appreciate you taking the time out. It was great chatting with you, and look forward to doing this again in the near future, but wish you all the best until we next speak.
Yeah, you too, Chris. Thanks a lot. Take care.
See ya. Bye-bye.
See ya.